Chapter 8. Tyranny of treating our friends like enemies and our enemies like friends. In the 1950s, when I was growing up, they were called eggheads. Today, they're called nerds. We're all familiar with them. They've got an excess of IQ and a shortage of testosterone. They spend most of their lives inside the academic incubator with no real-world experience. They've never met a payroll or responded to anything more urgent than a fire drill, and they've never dealt with anyone who challenged their leftist politics. After they graduate, they shuffle from campus to Washington and back. There are cabinet secretaries, ambassadors, and presidential advisors. They bring along a globalist perspective that is an absolute danger to the United States' position of economic and military supremacy in the world. Beatle John Lennon called them college pudding. It's these people who advise Obama on how to conduct his foreign policy. In the previous chapter, I told you about how they decided which wars we would fight and which ones we would ignore, based on the responsibility to protect doctrine. Now I'm going to tell you about how they decide which dictators to support and which to oust. These Ivy Leaguers, especially President Obama, have trouble telling our friends from our enemies. They tend to get it all backwards. More trickle-down tyranny. They ignore or attack our old friends and give aid and comfort to our former enemies and eventually hope to get them to switch places. The Soros Doctrine in the Middle East. I can't count the number of times I've heard the phrase international community used by the Obama administration. The reason is that the term is code for global government. The international community. You have to make it sound like the bleating of a sheep when you say it, because that's how the people who are pushing for global government view everyone else on the planet, as sheep. Global government is nothing more than warmed-over Marxist-Leninist communism on a planetary scale. Did you think that what happened all over the Middle East during the Arab Spring, which has now become the Arab Winter, was somehow a spontaneous uprising of freedom-loving young people wearing blue jeans and carrying cell phones and determined to promote democratic government in their countries? In fact, the whole situation has been carefully orchestrated from behind the scenes by George Soros, the same man who helped engineer Barack Obama's rise to power in the United States. It starts with the fact that America is a rudderless, leaderless nation. Weak, inexperienced leaders like Barack Obama are easy prey for international power brokers like Soros. I explained in Trickle Up Poverty how Soros was instrumental in bringing about Obama's election by working to cause the financial meltdown that enabled Obama to win. Obama had been behind in all the polls up to the time of the September 2008 financial crash, but he never trailed after it. Soros's influence didn't stop with getting a malleable schoolboy elected president. It continued to significantly affect the president's foreign policy. From the fact that we now treat our friends like enemies and our enemies like friends, right down to how the administration conducted the war in Libya. It means that everything is upside down and backwards in Obama's foreign policy, just like George Soros wants it to be. I'll make it very simple for you. The Obama foreign policy can be summed up like this. Treat your sworn enemies like friends, and your longtime friends like enemies. It's the Ivy League way. When a genuine democratic uprising against an illegally elected Islamist government in Iran began in 2009, Obama stood mute as Iranians were murdered by Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's military in order to quell the uprising. Soviet dissident Natan Sharansky called Obama's inaction maybe one of the biggest betrayals of people's freedom in modern history. At the moment when millions were deciding whether to go to the barricades, the leader of the free world said, "For us, the most important thing is engagement with the regime, so we don't want a change of regime." After Syria's Iranian puppet dictator Bashar al-Assad's forces had attacked and killed dozens of unarmed citizens as they protested against his regime, Hillary Clinton praised him as a reformer. In other words, if you're an ally of Iran and committed to the destruction of Israel and to the establishment of a new caliphate in the Middle East headed by nuclear Iran, you've got U.S. backing. It didn't stop with Syria. Tunisian dictator Zine El Abidine Ben Ali had, throughout his 23-year dictatorial reign, been an ally of the United States and an enemy of Islamic militant groups. Protesters forced him to step down in January 2011, despite the fact that he had said he would not run for another term in Tunisia's 2014 elections. Again, dozens of people were killed in clashes with police in Tunisia without our feeling the need to step in. As one journalist noted, not one word of condemnation, not one word of criticism, not one word urging restraint came from Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton, as live ammunition was fired into crowds of unarmed men, women, and children. And not one word of support for Hosni Mubarak, a Middle Eastern ruler who had kept Islamist radicals under control, was ever uttered by anyone in the Obama administration. From the shameful Middle Eastern apology tour early in his administration to his selective support of radical Islamist dictators, Obama has made it clear whose side he's on. In the spring of 2011, I explained in an article I wrote and posted on my website exactly what would happen as a result of the uprisings across the Arab world. Radical Muslim governments, with the support of George Soros and other anti-Western ideologues, would emerge where leaders had been ousted. As I predicted, that is happening. The war in Libya and the U.S. decision to commit resources to the ouster of Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi came during a time when the Middle East was in chaos, with Arab Spring uprisings against dictatorial governments happening in nearly a dozen countries. Obama's response to the uprisings reflected a disturbing trend, a pattern that's becoming apparent in the selective way he goes after Middle Eastern tyrants. Every single one of the dictators the Obama administration has actively targeted for overthrow has been a U.S. ally. Every one of the dictators Obama has refused to confront is the head of an Islamist regime that is hostile to the United States. Do you realize that Obama's sympathy with the Islamist cause is so strong and pervasive that Congress had to pass a law banning the administration from further dealings with groups known to have ties to Islamist terrorists? In the continuing resolution passed in November 2011 that extended the government's ability to keep spending, there was a paragraph that prohibited any formal non-investigative cooperation with unindicted co-conspirators in terrorism cases. It forbids Obama from any further association with Islamist radicals out to destroy America. It's easy to understand why this was necessary. The Islamist sympathizer in the White House began to tip his hand as the chaos in the Middle East spread. Let's take a savage tour through the world and meet our new friends and new enemies.